I never planned to lie that night. But somehow, in just a few seconds, I found myself pretending to be the girlfriend of a man I had only met 5 minutes earlier. It all started when I walked into that crowded restaurant. I was just there to grab dinner and go home. But then a stranger rushed toward me. His eyes were desperate, like he was running from something. Before I could even ask what was going on, he grabbed my hand and whispered, "Please, just pretend you're my girlfriend for 1 minute." I should have said no. I should have walked away. But instead, I smiled, wrapped my arm around him, and played along. I thought it would last just 1 minute. I had no idea that one small lie would completely change my life and lead me to the most unexpected love story I've ever lived. I never planned to lie that night. In fact, I'm not even the type of person who lies. But somehow, in just a few seconds, I found myself pretending to be the girlfriend of a man I had only met 5 minutes earlier. And the strangest part, that one small lie ended up changing my entire life. But before I tell you how everything happened, you need to understand where I was in my life at that moment. Because honestly, that night, I wasn't looking for love. Not even a little bit. Actually, I had just promised myself that I was completely done with relationships. My name is Emily. I was 27 years old, living in a small apartment in downtown Chicago, and trying my best to rebuild my life after a breakup that had completely shattered me. 6 months earlier, the man I thought I was going to marry walked away like I meant nothing to him. 3 years together. 3 years of memories. 3 years of believing we had a future. And then one day he simply said, "I don't think this is working anymore." No explanation. No fight. No dramatic moment. Just, the end. I remember standing in my kitchen that day, staring at him while he packed his things like he was leaving a hotel room. Like the life we built together meant absolutely nothing. That was the day something inside me changed. I stopped believing in love stories. I stopped believing in forever. And most importantly, I stopped believing that someone could truly choose me. 4 months after that breakup, I focused only on work. Wake up. Go to the office. Come home. Watch something on Netflix. Sleep. Repeat. My friends tried to convince me to start dating again. They said things like, "You're young, Emily. You'll meet someone better. There are millions of great guys out there." But I wasn't interested. Not anymore. Love felt like a risk I couldn't afford to take again. So instead, I built a quiet, predictable life where nothing surprising ever happened. And honestly, I thought I was finally okay with that. Until the night everything changed. It was a Friday evening in October. The weather in Chicago had started getting cold, and the wind felt sharp against my face as I walked down the street after work. Normally I would just go home. But that night, I didn't feel like sitting alone in my apartment again. So I decided to stop by a small Italian restaurant a few blocks from my office. It was one of those cozy places with dim lighting, warm music, and the smell of fresh pasta in the air. The kind of place couples usually went for dates. Which meant it was probably the worst place for someone like me to be. But I didn't care. I just wanted food and maybe a glass of wine. When I walked in, the restaurant was crowded. People were laughing, talking, clinking glasses. A couple near the window was holding hands across the table. I looked away quickly. The host guided me to a small table near the corner of the room. I sat down, ordered a plate of pasta and a glass of red wine, and pulled out my phone to distract myself. That was when I noticed him. He was sitting 2 tables away. Tall. Dark hair. Probably around 30. At first, nothing about him seemed unusual. He looked like a normal guy having dinner alone. But then I noticed something strange. He kept looking toward the entrance. Not casually. Nervously. Like he was waiting for someone, or trying to avoid someone. Every few seconds his eyes moved to the door. Then back to his table. Then back to the door again. I remember thinking it was a little odd. But I didn't pay too much attention. Everyone has their own story. And it wasn't my business. A few minutes later my food arrived. I was halfway through my pasta when suddenly the restaurant door opened again. 3 people walked in. A middle-aged woman. A man in a suit. And a younger woman who looked extremely annoyed. The moment they stepped inside, something changed. I didn't notice it at first. But then I looked over at the guy sitting 2 tables away. And his entire expression froze. His shoulders tensed. His eyes widened. It looked like he had just seen a ghost. For a moment, he stared directly at those 3 people. Then he looked around the room quickly, like he was searching for something. Or someone. And then suddenly, his eyes landed on me. We made eye contact for about 2 seconds. Just enough for me to think, why is he looking at me like that? And before I could even process what was happening, he stood up. Walked straight toward my table. And stopped right beside me. My first thought was that he had mistaken me for someone else. But then he leaned closer and whispered something that made absolutely no sense. He said, "Please. I need your help." I blinked in confusion. What? His voice was urgent now. Just for 1 minute, pretend you're my girlfriend. I stared at him. Completely speechless. I had never seen this man before in my life. And now he was asking me to pretend we were dating. My brain immediately said no. This was ridiculous. Weird. Possibly even dangerous. But before I could respond, the 3 people who had just entered the restaurant started walking in our direction. And the man beside me gently grabbed my hand. Then he looked directly into my eyes and whispered again. "Please, if you don't help me right now, my life is about to get very complicated." And without waiting for my answer, he pulled out the chair beside me and sat down. Still holding my hand. Still acting like we were a couple. My heart started beating faster. I had no idea what was going on. But somehow, in that moment, instead of pulling my hand away, instead of telling him to leave, I did something completely unexpected. I smiled. And wrapped my arm around him. Because for some reason, I decided to play along. The moment I wrapped my arm around him, I felt his body relax just a little. Like he had been holding his breath, and finally exhaled. But my heart, it was beating so fast I was sure he could feel it. I had no idea what I had just gotten myself into. All I knew was that 3 strangers were now walking directly toward our table. And apparently, I was someone's girlfriend. Great. The man beside me leaned slightly closer and whispered quietly, "Thank you, just act natural." Act natural? I almost laughed. There was nothing natural about pretending to date a stranger in the middle of a restaurant. But before I could ask him anything else, the 3 people stopped right in front of our table. The middle-aged woman was the first to speak. "Daniel." Her voice sounded surprised, but also suspicious. So his name was Daniel. Good to know. Daniel looked up at her slowly, like he had just noticed them. "Oh, hi." It was the least convincing reaction I had ever seen. The woman crossed her arms. Interesting coincidence seeing you here. Then her eyes moved toward me. And suddenly, I felt like I was being examined under a microscope. Daniel didn't hesitate. He smiled and gently squeezed my hand. Actually, I'm here with someone. The younger woman standing beside the older couple looked even more annoyed now. Of course you are, she muttered under her breath. The older man in the suit looked at Daniel, then at me. And who might this be? Daniel turned toward me. For a split second, our eyes met. I could see the silent question in his expression. Are you still playing along? My brain screamed, this is crazy. But somehow my mouth moved before my brain could stop it. I smiled politely. Hi. I'm Emily. Daniel added quickly, my girlfriend. There it was. The official lie. The middle-aged woman raised one eyebrow. Your girlfriend. Her tone made it very clear she did not believe a single word of that. The younger woman, who looked about my age, rolled her eyes dramatically. Oh please. She looked straight at Daniel. You've known her for what, 5 minutes? My stomach dropped. Wait. How did she know that? Daniel laughed nervously. I have no idea what you're talking about. The older man sighed, clearly tired of the situation. Daniel, we've been trying to call you all evening. Daniel shrugged. My phone died. The younger woman crossed her arms. So instead of meeting us like you promised, you decided to come here and suddenly have a girlfriend. The tension at the table was getting thicker every second. I sat there quietly, trying to understand what kind of drama I had just walked into. Finally the middle-aged woman spoke again. Her voice was calm, but firm. Daniel, sweetheart, you do realize tonight was important? Daniel forced a smile. I know, Mom. Mom, oh great. So this was his family. That made everything even worse. His mother looked back at me again. Her expression softened slightly. Well, Emily, it's nice to meet you, but the younger woman was definitely not convinced. She stepped closer to the table and looked directly at me. Let me guess, she said. You met him tonight? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Because technically, she was right. Daniel quickly jumped in. We met a few weeks ago actually. The younger woman laughed. That's funny. She pointed toward the empty chair Daniel had been sitting in earlier. Because when we walked in, he was sitting alone. My heart skipped a beat. Daniel paused. For the first time since he sat down, he looked slightly nervous. The older man checked his watch. All right, he said calmly. We're not doing this here. Then he looked at Daniel. You're coming with us. Daniel shook his head immediately. I can't. The younger woman raised an eyebrow. Because of your girlfriend. Daniel didn't answer. Instead he did something unexpected. He turned toward me, and gently kissed the side of my hand. The entire table went silent. Even I was shocked. But Daniel looked completely serious as he said, because I'm having dinner with Emily. His mother looked between us slowly. Then she sighed. Well, this is certainly new. The younger woman clearly wasn't buying any of it. She leaned closer to Daniel and whispered something sharp, You're unbelievable. Then she turned around and walked toward another table across the restaurant. The older man followed her. But Daniel's mother stayed behind for a moment. She looked at me again carefully. Not angry. Just curious. Then she said something I definitely wasn't expecting. Emily, if you're going to date my son, I hope you know he's very good at creating complicated situations. I didn't know what to say to that. So I just smiled awkwardly. Finally she nodded politely and walked away. And just like that, the strange confrontation was over. Daniel slowly released my hand. Then he leaned back in his chair and covered his face with both hands. For a few seconds he didn't say anything. Finally he looked up at me. And for the first time since this whole thing started, he laughed. I cannot believe you actually did that. I crossed my arms. I cannot believe I did that either. He shook his head in disbelief. You just saved my life. I narrowed my eyes. Okay, you definitely owe me an explanation. Daniel nodded immediately. Yeah, that's fair. He took a deep breath. Long story short, my family was trying to set me up on a blind date tonight. My eyes widened slightly. With her. He nodded toward the table where the younger woman was now sitting with his parents. Her name is Sophie. I glanced over at them. Sophie was staring directly at us. She definitely looked annoyed. Daniel sighed. Our families have been friends forever, and they've been trying to push us together for years. And you didn't want that, I asked. Not even a little, he replied. So you pretended to have a girlfriend? He smiled sheepishly. Well, technically. Then he looked at me. I didn't pretend. I blinked. What? Daniel leaned forward slightly. And then he said something that completely caught me off guard. I actually meant what I said. I frowned in confusion. You just met me. He nodded. I know. Then what do you mean? Daniel looked directly into my eyes. And with a small smile he said, Emily. I think tonight might be the most interesting night of my life. And somehow, I had a strange feeling, mine too. For a moment, I just stared at him. I'm sorry, what I asked. Daniel looked completely calm, like he hadn't just said something incredibly strange. I said this might be the most interesting night of my life. I shook my head. You just dragged a random woman into your family drama. He smiled. And somehow, you handled it perfectly. I leaned back in my chair and crossed my arms. Let's be clear about something, I said. This whole fake girlfriend situation ends the moment I finish my pasta. Daniel laughed softly. Fair enough. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The noise of the restaurant filled the silence around us. Glasses clinking. People talking. Soft music playing in the background. Everything felt normal again. Except it wasn't. Because across the room, Sophie was still staring at us. And she did not look happy. I leaned slightly toward Daniel and whispered, Your almost date is definitely planning my murder. Daniel glanced over his shoulder. Yeah, she does that. I raised an eyebrow. She does that. He shrugged casually. Sophie doesn't like losing. Losing what, I asked. Control, he replied. That answer made me curious. But before I could ask anything else, our waiter returned with Daniel's drink. Daniel thanked him and then looked back at me. Seriously though, thank you. I shrugged. You were clearly desperate. He nodded. That obvious? Extremely. For the first time since all this started, the conversation felt normal. Daniel picked up his glass. So Emily, tell me something. What? Why did you actually help me? I thought about that for a moment. Honestly, I didn't know the answer myself. I guess, I said slowly, you looked like someone who really needed help. Daniel watched me carefully. Then he said quietly, not many people would have done that. I shrugged again. Well, don't get used to it. He smiled. Too charming, if I was being honest. And that made me slightly suspicious. Guys who smiled like that usually came with trouble. I pointed my fork at him. So what's the real story? What do you mean? Your family clearly expected you tonight, I said. You clearly didn't want to be here. So what are you actually running from? Daniel looked down at the table for a moment. Then he sighed. It's complicated. I laughed. Of course it is. But before he could answer, a chair suddenly scraped loudly across the floor. Both of us turned. Sophie was standing up. And she was walking straight toward us again. Great. Daniel noticed her too. Oh no. What, I asked. That look on her face, he said quietly. That's the I'm about to start a scene look. Sophie stopped right beside our table. Her expression was cold. You know what she said? I'm actually impressed. Daniel sighed. Sophie. No, really, she continued. She looked directly at me. You're a very convincing actress. I blinked. I'm not. Oh please, she interrupted. You expect me to believe this is real? The entire restaurant was starting to notice the tension. A few people were already watching. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Sophie, this isn't necessary. But Sophie ignored him. Her eyes stayed locked on me. So tell me something, Emily. How long have you known Daniel? For a moment, everything froze. Because technically, the truth was about 20 minutes. But if I said that, this whole fake story would collapse instantly. Daniel looked at me quietly. He didn't say anything. He was letting me decide. I could tell the truth. Or I could keep lying. For some reason, my heart started beating faster again. And before I could overthink it, I answered. A few weeks. Sophie laughed. Really? I nodded calmly. Yes. She leaned slightly closer to me. Then tell me something. What's Daniel's favorite food? My brain went blank. Of course I didn't know that. I had just met him. Sophie smiled like she had already won. Daniel looked at me, clearly nervous now. The whole lie was about to collapse. The restaurant felt completely silent. And then, I did the only thing I could think of. I turned toward Daniel, smiled, and said confidently, steak. Daniel blinked. Sophie crossed her arms. Is that true? Daniel stared at me for 1 second. 2 seconds. Then suddenly he laughed. Actually, yeah. Sophie frowned. Seriously? Daniel nodded. Medium rare. I exhaled slowly. That was pure luck. But Sophie still didn't look convinced. She shook her head. You know what, fine. Then she leaned closer to Daniel and whispered something sharp. You can play this little game all you want. But I promise you. This isn't over. Then she turned and walked back to her table. Daniel leaned back in his chair again. Wow. What, I asked. You're really good at this. I laughed nervously. I guessed. Lucky guess, he said. Then he looked at me again, more seriously this time. You didn't have to keep helping me. I shrugged. Well, now I'm invested. Daniel smiled. And something about that smile felt different now. Less like a stranger. More like someone I actually wanted to know. But I had no idea yet, that the biggest surprise of the night, was still coming. Because only a few minutes later, Daniel's phone suddenly lit up on the table. He looked at the screen. And his expression changed instantly. All the humor disappeared from his face. What happened? I asked. Daniel looked at me slowly. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. That is very bad timing. Why? He showed me the phone screen. And the message said, your fiancé is looking for you. I blinked. Then I looked at Daniel. You're what? For a moment, I thought I had read the message wrong. I looked at Daniel. Then back at the phone. Then back at Daniel again. Your fiancé, I repeated slowly. Daniel rubbed his forehead like he had just developed a headache. It's not what it sounds like. I stared at him. That sentence has never made anything better in the history of humanity. Daniel let out a tired laugh. Okay, fair point. I pushed my plate slightly away. Would you like to explain why I just pretended to be the girlfriend of a man who apparently has a fiancé? Daniel leaned forward quickly. Emily, listen, it's not real. That message looks pretty real, I replied. He shook his head. It's not a real engagement. I raised an eyebrow. So, a fake fiancé? Something like that, he said. I crossed my arms again. You're really not making this sound less insane. Daniel sighed deeply. All right. Then he glanced toward the table where his family and Sophie were sitting. They were clearly watching us. Daniel lowered his voice. My family runs a big business. I nodded slowly. Okay. And Sophie's family runs another big business. I immediately understood where this was going. Oh no. Daniel nodded. Oh yes. They want you two to get married, I said. Exactly. I leaned back in my chair. You're kidding. I wish I was. I looked over at Sophie again. She was sipping her drink calmly, but her eyes kept drifting toward us. So the blind date tonight, I said, was basically an arranged marriage interview. Daniel smiled weakly. Pretty much. I shook my head. And the fiancé message? Daniel picked up his phone and showed it to me again. It's from my cousin. Why would your cousin say you have a fiancé? Daniel hesitated. Then he said something that made the situation even more ridiculous. Because technically, I do. I stared at him. You just said it wasn't real. It isn't. Then why does everyone think it is? Daniel sighed. Because my parents announced it at a business event last week. My eyes widened. You're serious? I didn't even know they were going to do it, he said. So you're engaged to Sophie, and you found out about it the same time everyone else did. Exactly. I couldn't help it. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the entire situation felt completely unbelievable. You know, I said, this might be the strangest dinner I've ever had. Daniel smiled slightly. Same. Then he became serious again. I was supposed to meet them tonight and celebrate the engagement. And instead you ran away, I said. Correct. And then used a random stranger as your fake girlfriend. He nodded. Also correct. I leaned back and studied him carefully. You're aware this sounds like a romantic comedy, right? Daniel chuckled. Yeah, except it's my real life. For a moment, we both just looked at each other. And something strange happened. Instead of feeling annoyed, or uncomfortable, I actually felt amused, because for the first time in months, something unexpected had happened in my life. Something chaotic. Something unpredictable. Daniel broke the silence. You can still walk away, you know. What do you mean? You've already helped me more than I deserve, he said. You don't have to stay involved in this. I looked at him for a moment. Then I asked something important. Do you actually want to marry her? Daniel answered instantly. No. Not even a second of hesitation. Why not? I asked. He looked toward Sophie again. Then back at me. Because a marriage like that wouldn't be about love. That answer caught me off guard. Maybe because it sounded honest. Or maybe because 6 months ago, I would have said the same thing. Daniel continued quietly. I know it sounds stupid, but I still believe you should marry someone you actually choose. For some reason, that sentence hit me harder than I expected. Because after my breakup, I had stopped believing that too. Before I could respond, someone suddenly appeared beside our table. We both turned. And there she was. Sophie. Again. But this time, she wasn't alone. Daniel's parents were standing behind her. And Sophie looked extremely confident. She folded her arms and looked directly at me. All right, she said calmly. If this is real, prove it. Daniel frowned. Sophie. No, she interrupted. She pointed at me. If she's really your girlfriend, she won't mind joining us. My stomach tightened slightly. Joining you? For dinner, Sophie said. At our table. Daniel shook his head immediately. That's unnecessary. But Sophie smiled. Oh, I think it's very necessary. Then she looked at me again. Unless you're afraid. The restaurant felt quiet again. Everyone around us was definitely watching now. Daniel looked at me. I'm sorry, he said quietly. You don't have to do this. And honestly, he was right. I didn't have to. I could stand up. Leave the restaurant. And forget this entire strange night ever happened. That would have been the logical choice. The safe choice. But instead, I surprised myself again. I stood up slowly. Looked at Sophie. And smiled politely. Dinner sounds nice. Daniel blinked in shock. Emily. I leaned closer to him and whispered, relax. If I'm going to be your fake girlfriend, I might as well be a convincing one. And I had no idea yet, that sitting at that table with his family, was about to change everything. The moment I said yes, Daniel looked at me like I had completely lost my mind. Emily. He whispered. You really don't have to do this. I smiled slightly. Relax. Then I gently grabbed his hand again. If we're doing this, we're doing it properly. Daniel's parents watched the whole moment carefully. His mother looked curious. His father looked thoughtful. But Sophie looked like she was preparing for war. Great, she said coldly. Let's sit. We walked toward their table. And suddenly I realized something important. 5 minutes ago, these people were complete strangers. Now I was about to have dinner with them, pretending to be someone's girlfriend. My life had officially become ridiculous. Daniel pulled out a chair for me. Thank you, I said. His mother smiled politely. Well, Emily, this evening just became much more interesting. That's one way to describe it, I replied. Daniel sat beside me. Across from us were his parents. And Sophie sat directly across from me. Perfect. The tension was so obvious that even the waiter seemed nervous when he came over. "Can I get anyone something to drink?" he asked. Daniel's father ordered wine for the table. Sophie didn't take her eyes off me. Not even for a second. Finally she spoke. "So Emily." Her tone was sweet. Too sweet. "What do you do for a living?" That question at least had a simple answer. "I work in marketing," I said. "Digital campaigns for small businesses." Daniel's mother nodded approvingly. "That sounds interesting." "It keeps me busy," I replied. Sophie leaned back in her chair. "And how exactly did you meet Daniel?" There it was. The dangerous question. Daniel quickly jumped in. "At a friend's birthday party." I turned toward him slightly. "Right," I said calmly. "That party was memorable." Sophie raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "Yes," I said. "That was the night Daniel spilled an entire drink on his own shoes." Daniel looked at me in surprise. But he immediately played along. "Worst night ever." His father laughed slightly. "That does sound like something Daniel would do." For the first time since sitting down, the mood relaxed just a little. But Sophie wasn't done. She leaned forward again. "And how long have you been dating?" I looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at me. Neither of us had prepared that detail. So I took a small sip of water and answered, "About 3 weeks." Daniel nodded. "Best 3 weeks of my life." I kicked him gently under the table. "Subtle." His mother smiled warmly. "Well, I must say, this is a surprise." Daniel looked innocent. "Good surprise or bad surprise?" She thought for a moment. "Unexpected surprise." Sophie sighed dramatically. "This is ridiculous." Everyone looked at her. "You really expect us to believe this?" she said. Daniel frowned. "Sophie." "No," she interrupted. Then she pointed at me. "If she's really your girlfriend, she should know basic things about you." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "Like what?" Sophie smiled. "Oh. I don't know." Then she looked directly at me. "What's Daniel's biggest fear?" I froze for half a second. That question was impossible. We had known each other for less than an hour. But something inside my brain suddenly remembered something. Earlier in the restaurant, Daniel kept looking at the door nervously. Like he was trying to avoid someone. Like he hated being controlled. So I took a small risk. I looked directly at Sophie and answered, "Being trapped in a life he didn't choose." The table went completely silent. Daniel looked at me. Not shocked. Not amused. Just surprised. His mother slowly turned toward him. "Is that true?" she asked softly. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he kept looking at me. Then finally he said quietly, "Yet." His father frowned slightly. But Sophie immediately rolled her eyes. "Oh please." She looked at Daniel again. "You're being dramatic." Daniel's voice was calm now. "No. I'm being honest." The tension came back instantly. His father cleared his throat. "Daniel, we'll discuss this later." But Daniel didn't look away from me. For a strange moment, it felt like the entire room disappeared. And it was just the two of us sitting there. Then Sophie suddenly stood up. Her chair scraped loudly across the floor again. "This is pointless," she said. She looked at Daniel angrily. "You can keep pretending all you want. But sooner or later." Her eyes moved to me. The truth always comes out. Then she grabbed her bag and walked out of the restaurant. The door slammed behind her. Silence. Daniel's father sighed. Well, that could have gone better. His mother looked slightly embarrassed. I'm sorry about this, Emily. I shook my head. It's okay. But Daniel was still looking at the door Sophie had just walked through. Something about his expression had changed. Daniel, I asked quietly. He looked back at me. Then he said something unexpected. She's not done. What do you mean? Daniel picked up his phone again. And just like before, a new message had appeared. He showed me the screen. My stomach dropped instantly. Because the message said, "Your girlfriend Emily, we should talk about her." I frowned. Who sent that? Daniel looked serious now. My private investigator. I blinked. You're what? And suddenly, this night became even stranger than before. I stared at Daniel's phone in disbelief. Your private investigator, I repeated. Daniel quickly locked the screen and slipped the phone back into his pocket. It's not as crazy as it sounds, he said. I raised an eyebrow. It sounds extremely crazy. Daniel sighed. Okay, maybe a little crazy. His parents looked confused. His mother spoke first. Daniel, what investigator? Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. It's nothing serious. His father frowned. You hired someone to investigate something without telling us. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at me for a moment, like he was deciding how much to say. Finally he spoke. I hired him a few weeks ago. His mother looked concerned. For what reason? Daniel glanced toward the restaurant door where Sophie had just left. Then he said quietly, to check if Sophie was lying. The table went silent again. His father leaned forward. Lying about what? Daniel exhaled slowly. I had a feeling something wasn't right. His mother shook her head. Daniel. Sophie's family has been our partners for years. I know, he replied. But something didn't add up. I watched the entire conversation quietly. This situation had somehow become even more complicated than before. Daniel's father looked irritated. You should have talked to us first. Daniel nodded. Maybe. Then he pulled out his phone again. But apparently, the investigator just found something. I leaned slightly closer. About Sophie. Daniel looked at the message again. His expression became serious. Maybe. His mother looked nervous now. What does it say? Daniel read it silently for a few seconds. Then he looked up at all of us. It says he wants to meet me tonight. His father frowned. Tonight? Yes. And why exactly? His father asked. Daniel hesitated. Then he said something that made everyone at the table freeze. He says Sophie might already be engaged to someone else. What? His mother gasped. I blinked in shock. That's a plot twist. Daniel nodded slowly. Apparently she's been secretly dating someone for almost a year. His father leaned back in his chair. That's impossible. Daniel shrugged. That's what I hired someone to confirm. His mother looked confused. But why would she agree to this marriage then? Daniel answered quietly. Money. The word hung in the air. His father didn't respond. But his expression darkened. I could tell he was thinking about business deals, contracts, reputation. Meanwhile, I was still trying to process the situation. So let me get this straight, I said. You pretended to have a girlfriend to avoid a fake engagement. And now the woman you were supposed to marry might already have a secret boyfriend. Daniel nodded. Basically, yes. I laughed softly. This story keeps getting better. Daniel smiled. Or worse. For a moment, we both laughed. And somehow, the tension eased again. Daniel's parents continued discussing things quietly: business, family reputation, what this discovery might mean. But Daniel leaned slightly toward me and lowered his voice. I owe you an apology. For what? For dragging you into all of this. I shrugged. You didn't force me. Still, he said. You probably expected a quiet dinner tonight. That ship sailed an hour ago. Daniel smiled again. But this time, the smile looked different. Less playful. More genuine. He studied my face for a moment. Then he asked something unexpected. Can I ask you something personal? I hesitated. Depends. Why were you eating alone tonight? That question hit closer to home than I expected. I looked down at my glass. Bad breakup, I said simply. Daniel didn't say anything. He just listened. 6 months ago, I continued. I thought I was going to marry someone. Daniel nodded slowly. And he left. Just like that. Pretty much. Daniel frowned slightly. That's rough. I shrugged. It happens. For a few seconds neither of us spoke. Then Daniel said something quietly. His loss. I looked up at him. That's a very confident statement for someone who met me an hour ago. He smiled. Well, I have good instincts. I laughed. Your instincts also led you to pretend I was your girlfriend. Best decision of the night, he said. Something about the way he said that made my heart beat a little faster. Which was dangerous. Very dangerous. Because I had promised myself something after my breakup. No more emotional risks. No more unexpected connections. And definitely no falling for charming strangers in restaurants. Before I could say anything else, Daniel's phone buzzed again. He looked at it. Then stood up. That's him, he said. The investigator. His father looked up. You're going now? Daniel nodded. Yes. Then he looked at me. You don't have to stay. But for some reason, I stood up too. I'm curious now. Daniel blinked in surprise. You want to come? I smiled slightly. Well, if I'm your fake girlfriend, I should probably hear the rest of the story. Daniel laughed. You're either very brave or very reckless. Probably both, I said. His parents exchanged confused looks. But Daniel grabbed his jacket. Then he looked at me again. All right, Emily. Let's go find out the truth. And neither of us realized yet, that the truth we were about to hear, would change both of our lives in ways we never expected. About 20 minutes later, Daniel and I were sitting in a quiet coffee shop across the street from the restaurant. The place was almost empty. Soft jazz music played in the background, and the smell of fresh coffee filled the air. It felt completely different from the chaos we had just left behind. Daniel checked his phone again. He should be here any minute, he said. I wrapped my hands around my cup of coffee. You really hire investigators often? Daniel laughed softly. No. Good, I said. Because that would be a red flag. He smiled. You're surprisingly calm about all of this. I shrugged. Honestly, my life has been pretty boring lately. Daniel leaned back in his chair. So you decided to spice it up by helping a stranger escape an arranged marriage. Exactly. We both laughed. And for a moment, everything felt light again. But then the door of the coffee shop opened. A man in his 40s walked in. Dark coat. Serious expression. He looked around the room once. Then walked straight toward our table. Daniel Carter, he asked. Daniel nodded. That's me. The man sat down across from us. Then he glanced at me. And you are? Emily, I said. Daniel quickly added, she's with me. The man nodded slowly. All right. He placed a small envelope on the table. I'm Michael. Private investigator. Daniel leaned forward. So what did you find? Michael opened the envelope and slid a few printed photos across the table. Daniel picked them up. I leaned closer to look. And what I saw immediately explained everything. The photos showed Sophie. But she wasn't alone. She was hugging a man outside a hotel. In another photo, they were holding hands. In the last one, they were kissing. Daniel exhaled slowly. So it's true. Michael nodded. They've been seeing each other for almost 11 months. I blinked. 11 months. Daniel rubbed his forehead. That's before our parents even started talking about the engagement. Michael continued calmly. The man's name is Ryan Miller. Investment broker. Lives in New York. Daniel looked at the photos again. Does she plan to marry him? Michael shrugged. Hard to say. But according to my sources, Ryan doesn't know anything about your engagement. I leaned back in my chair. That's messy. Daniel gave a tired laugh. That's one word for it. Michael leaned forward slightly. There's something else. Daniel looked up. What? Michael tapped one of the photos. Ryan isn't the only secret Sophie has. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? Michael reached into the envelope again. Then he pulled out another document. A contract. He slid it across the table. Daniel read it carefully. And suddenly his expression changed. What is it? I asked. Daniel looked at me slowly. This is a merger contract. With Sophie's family company. And Daniel pointed at a line in the document. The deal only happens if Sophie and I get married. My eyes widened. So the marriage is literally part of the business deal. Daniel nodded. Exactly. Michael added calmly, and Sophie's family company is currently in serious financial trouble. I blinked. So they need the marriage to save their business. Yes, Michael said. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Wow. For a moment no one spoke. The situation suddenly made perfect sense. Sophie wasn't just agreeing to the marriage. She needed it. But she also had a secret boyfriend. Which meant she was basically playing two different lives at the same time. Finally I said what everyone was thinking. So, what happens now? Daniel looked at the photos again. Then he smiled slightly. Well, I think my parents are about to hear some very interesting news. Michael stood up. My job here is done. Daniel nodded. Thank you. Michael left the coffee shop quietly. Now it was just the two of us again. Daniel stared at the photos on the table. Then he suddenly started laughing. Not a small laugh. A real one. What? I asked. This whole situation is insane, he said. You realize that, right? I smiled. Oh, absolutely. Daniel looked at me again. And somehow, you're still here. I shrugged. I told you. I'm invested now. He studied my face for a moment. Then he said something quietly. You know, tonight started with me pretending you were my girlfriend. I raised an eyebrow. Yes. But now, he continued, I'm starting to wish it wasn't pretend. My heart skipped a beat. I quickly looked down at my coffee. That's a dangerous sentence. Daniel smiled. Why? Because, I said softly, I'm very bad at fake relationships. He leaned slightly closer. Maybe we should try a real one then. I looked up at him. And for a moment, I didn't know what to say. Because 6 months ago, after my breakup, I promised myself I wouldn't let anyone get close again. But somehow, in just one strange night, this man had walked straight into my life. And I didn't know if I should run away, or stay. But before I could answer, the coffee shop door opened again. Daniel looked toward it. And his expression instantly changed. Oh. What I asked. Daniel sighed. Looks like the night isn't over yet. I turned around. And my stomach dropped. Because standing in the doorway, was Sophie. And she did not look happy. The moment I saw Sophie standing in the doorway of the coffee shop, I knew this conversation wasn't going to be friendly. She walked in slowly. Her heels clicking against the floor. Every step sounded loud in the quiet cafe. Daniel leaned back in his chair and sighed. Well, this should be interesting. I whispered quietly, did you invite her? Daniel shook his head. Nope. Sophie stopped right beside our table. Her eyes moved from Daniel, to me, then down to the photos lying on the table. For a split second, her confident expression disappeared. But only for a moment. Then she smiled. A cold smile. So, she said calmly. You hired someone to spy on me. Daniel didn't look surprised. I hired someone to confirm the truth. Sophie crossed her arms. You mean your version of the truth? Daniel slid one of the photos toward her. Explain this. Sophie looked at the photo. It was the one where she was kissing Ryan outside the hotel. She didn't look embarrassed. She didn't look nervous. Instead, she laughed. You really think this changes anything? I blinked. Wait, what? Daniel frowned. Sophie, you're literally dating someone else. Yes, she said simply. And? The room felt silent. Daniel stared at her. You're engaged to me. Sophie leaned slightly closer to the table. No, Daniel. I'm engaged to your family's money. Even I felt shocked hearing that. But Sophie didn't look ashamed at all. In fact, she looked completely calm. Daniel shook his head slowly. You're unbelievable. Sophie shrugged. Let's not pretend this engagement was about love. She looked at me. You think you're special? I raised an eyebrow. I never said that. You're just a distraction, Sophie said coldly. Daniel's parents will never allow this relationship. Daniel's jaw tightened. You don't speak for my parents. Sophie smirked. Oh please. Then she looked directly at me again. You don't belong in his world. For a moment, I considered just walking away. Because honestly her words were meant to make me feel small. Out of place. But instead, I leaned forward slightly and smiled. You're probably right. Sophie blinked. What? I don't belong in his world, I continued calmly. Because I don't marry people for business deals. Daniel tried not to smile. Sophie's expression hardened. You think you've won something tonight? No, I said. I think you lost something. Her eyes narrowed. What exactly? Control. The word hit harder than I expected. Because for the first time since she walked in, Sophie looked irritated. Daniel leaned back in his chair again. You should probably go. Sophie laughed. You really think this is over? She looked at Daniel seriously now. If this marriage doesn't happen, my family's company collapses. Daniel didn't move. That's not my responsibility. Sophie's voice became colder. It will be when your father cancels the merger. Daniel shrugged. Then maybe your family should have thought about that before lying. For a moment, the tension between them felt intense. Years of family expectations, business pressure, and secrets. Finally Sophie picked up one of the photos again. She stared at it. Then she looked at Daniel. You know what the funny part is? What Daniel asked. Sophie smiled slowly. Ryan doesn't know about any of this. Daniel frowned. So if this engagement ends? She paused. I'll just marry him instead. I blinked. That was always your plan. Sophie shrugged casually. Obviously. Daniel laughed. Wow. What she said. At least I'm honest. Daniel stood up from the table. That's the first honest thing you've said all night. Sophie grabbed her bag. Believe whatever you want. Then she looked at me one last time. But don't get too comfortable. She turned and walked toward the door. But just before leaving, she stopped. And said something that changed the mood instantly. Oh, and Emily. I looked at her. You might want to ask Daniel about why his last girlfriend disappeared. My stomach tightened. Daniel's expression went completely serious. Sophie smiled slightly. Then she walked out of the coffee shop. The door closed behind her. Silence filled the room. I slowly turned toward Daniel. What did she mean by that? Daniel didn't answer immediately. He stared down at the table. Then he ran a hand through his hair. And finally said quietly, she shouldn't have brought that up. My heart started beating faster again. Daniel. He looked up at me. And for the first time that night, he looked nervous. There's something about my past. He paused. That you probably deserve to know. And suddenly, this night was about to get even more complicated. Daniel took a deep breath. His hands rested on the table, but they weren't steady. Emily, there's something I've never told anyone, he said quietly. Not my parents, not friends, not even Sophie. I leaned in slightly, my curiosity mixed with caution. What is it? I asked softly. He hesitated for a moment, like he was choosing his words carefully. My last girlfriend, she disappeared. I blinked, confused. Disappeared? What do you mean? Daniel's eyes darkened. We were together for almost 3 years. I loved her. I trusted her completely. He paused, swallowed, and continued. Then one day, she just left. No explanation. No goodbye. Nothing. Just gone. I could see the pain lingering in his eyes. Wow, that must have been devastating, I said gently. Daniel nodded. It was. For months, I didn't know what to think. I blamed myself, I blamed her, I blamed everyone. But the truth? I never really got closure. I reached out, just slightly, to touch his hand. Emily. I mean, Daniel. I'm sorry. He shook his head. Don't be. I've carried it for a long time. But it taught me something important. About trust, about love. And about timing. I studied his face. There was vulnerability there, but also strength. Timing, I asked. Yes, he said, finally looking at me with something I hadn't seen before. Sometimes people leave, sometimes life is unfair. But when the right person comes along, you can't let fear stop you from trying again. My heart skipped a beat. He was talking to me. Not Sophie. Not the family drama. Not the chaos of the night. Just me. I felt the weight of the evening, the lies, the danger, the tension, but also something else, a strange, undeniable connection. I took a deep breath. So, you trust me enough to tell me this? I asked quietly. Daniel smiled slightly. Yes. That's why I wanted you to know before anything else. You deserve the truth. For a moment, we just sat there. The noise of the coffee shop faded. It was only him and me. And I realized, in the middle of all the chaos, I felt safe. But I also knew, this was only the beginning. Because after a night like this, trusting anyone, especially someone like Daniel, was dangerous. Yet something told me. I wanted to try. I looked at him and whispered, then. I guess this is where we find out if trust is stronger than fear. Daniel's lips curved into a faint smile. Exactly. And in that moment, for the first time tonight, it felt like everything else, Sophie, the lies, the family pressure, mattered a little less. Because somehow, we had found a moment of truth. The coffee shop felt unusually quiet. Not because it was empty, but because the tension between Daniel and me had replaced everything else. He leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. You know, after tonight, I don't know what's real anymore, he said softly. I raised an eyebrow. You mean me or Sophie? He smiled faintly. Mostly you. I laughed quietly, though my heart skipped a beat. Don't get too confident. I'm still the stranger you dragged into your family chaos. Daniel reached across the table and gently brushed a strand of hair from my face. Maybe, he whispered. But somehow, I feel like I've known you longer than a few hours. I swallowed hard. His eyes, serious, warm, and just a little mischievous, held me in place. I didn't move. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Just the soft music, the distant clatter of cups, and the beating of my own heart. Then Daniel leaned closer. Emily. He said, voice low, almost hesitant. I felt a shiver run down my spine. You've been thrown into a mess tonight, but I want you here. Not as a fake girlfriend. Not as a distraction. Just, with me. I blinked. My pulse raced. The logical part of my brain screamed don't, but every other part, every part that had felt lonely for months, whispered yes. I leaned slightly closer. And if this ends badly? I asked softly. Daniel's hand found mine, fingers intertwining gently. Then we face it together, he said. Like we're supposed to. I didn't know how to respond, so I just let myself sit there, feeling the warmth of his hand. For the first time tonight, I felt like maybe chaos could turn into something real. Then Daniel smirked slightly. And just so you know, he added playfully, I'm not letting Sophie or anyone else scare you away from this, from us. I laughed softly. Good, I whispered. Because I wasn't planning to leave anyway. Our hands stayed intertwined across the table. The world outside the coffee shop faded. For the first time tonight, it wasn't about lies, family pressure, or secret fiancés. It was about us. And somehow, in the middle of chaos and danger, something new had begun. Because even when the night had started with a lie, the truth had brought us together. And maybe, just maybe, that was the start of something neither of us expected. Daniel and I stepped out of the coffee shop into the cool night air. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement from the earlier rain. For a moment, the chaos of the evening felt distant. But Daniel's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, his face tightening instantly. Not again, he muttered. I leaned closer. What now? He showed me the screen. A single message from an unknown number, meet me. Sophie and Ryan's plan is about to unfold. My stomach dropped. So, they're working together? I asked. Daniel nodded grimly. Yes. Apparently, this engagement wasn't just about money or business. Sophie and Ryan have been planning something bigger, and we're caught in the middle. I swallowed hard. Caught in the middle how? He took a deep breath. I don't know yet, but whatever it is, it's serious. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The tension returned heavier than before. And yet, despite the danger, the hand he placed over mine felt grounding. Comforting. Real. Then Daniel leaned closer, lowering his voice. Emily, whatever happens next, I need you to trust me. I met his gaze. I do, I said quietly, though my heart raced. Even after tonight. I trust you. A faint smile tugged at his lips. Good, he whispered. Because I'm not letting anyone hurt you. We walked to a quieter street, scanning for any sign of Sophie or Ryan. The night felt electric, every shadow potentially hiding a new twist. Suddenly, Daniel stopped. He turned toward me, eyes serious. Emily, before we confront them, there's something I need to admit. I frowned slightly. What? His lips curved in a small, nervous smile. I've been wanting to do this all night. And then he leaned in, closer than I expected, our lips met in a brief, gentle kiss. It was soft, electric, a spark neither of us could ignore. Everything else, the lies, the family drama, the fiancé chaos faded for a moment. All that mattered was us. When we pulled back, Daniel's eyes met mine. Whatever happens next, we face it together, he said firmly. I nodded. Yes, together. But even as we held hands, ready to face Sophie and Ryan, I couldn't shake the feeling that the night wasn't over. Because from the shadows across the street, I saw a figure watching us. And I knew, without a doubt, their plan was only just beginning. We stayed in the shadows of the street, watching the quiet city around us. The night had gone from chaotic to strangely calm, but I knew better. Daniel's hand was still gripping mine, tight enough to keep me grounded. Do you really think Sophie and Ryan will make a move tonight? I whispered. He shook his head slowly. I don't know, but I know they won't wait long. They've been planning something for months. The sound of footsteps made us both freeze. A man in a dark coat appeared across the street. Ryan. Daniel's jaw tightened. That's him. I could feel my pulse quicken. The man stared at us for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he turned and disappeared into the night. Daniel exhaled slowly. That's their first move. I frowned. First move, what does that mean? Daniel looked at me, eyes serious. They're testing us. Seeing how we react. Sophie wants to know if I'll protect you. Ryan wants to see if he can scare us. I shivered slightly. So, we're part of their game. Daniel nodded. Yes. But Emily, we can't back down now. We walked back toward a quieter alley to regroup. The city felt alive with tension, every shadow a potential threat. And yet, Daniel's presence made me feel strangely safe. He stopped suddenly and turned to me. Emily. I know tonight has been insane. Lies, family pressure, secrets. I nodded. Yet, I've never had a night like this in my entire life. Daniel smiled faintly. But through it all, you've been incredible. Strong. Calm. Brave. I felt my cheeks heat up slightly. Thank you, I whispered. He leaned closer, his voice dropping lower. And brave enough to stay by my side, even after all of this. I looked into his eyes, and for a moment, the world felt like it had stopped. Yes, I said quietly. Even after all of this. Daniel's hand reached up, brushing a strand of hair from my face. You have no idea how much that means to me, he murmured. Then, without warning, from the corner of the alley, a shadow moved. Sophie appeared, stepping out of the darkness. And behind her, Ryan. Their eyes locked on us. Sophie's smirk was cold, calculated. Ryan's stare was sharp, assessing. Daniel tightened his grip on my hand. They're not playing anymore, he said. I swallowed hard, adrenaline rushing through me. Then, we play too, I whispered back. The air between the four of us was electric. Danger, tension, and something deeper, and even as Sophie and Ryan stepped closer, Daniel leaned toward me, whispering, no matter what happens, I've got you. And in that moment, I realized this night would change everything. Because tonight, wasn't just about lies, secrets, or family pressure. It was about survival, trust, and the beginning of something neither of us expected.